This is Rebel Radio. Stay tuned for change.
Very excited to welcome onto the show two great people from the International Solidarity Network. We've got Esther, greetings, and Peninah.
Hi.
Hi, Esther and Peninah. Welcome onto the show. Now, part of the reason that we've got you here specifically in the month of May is because you're working on something called African Liberation Awareness Month. But actually, for all of our listeners, can you talk us through a bit about what International Solidarity Network is and what it does within XR? And also, Esther, could you tell me how you got involved in XR and in ISN in the first place?
Well, maybe we'll start with that, how I got involved, because that then feeds into developing the Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network. I got involved with XR, being involved primarily from the first rebellion day, which was in October 2018. But I was involved, I'm still involved with a campaign called Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide campaign. And Maangamizi, for those who are listening and wondering what that is, it's a Kiswahili term for African Holocaust, some would say Holocaust. And so we found an affinity with Extinction Rebellion because we were already organizing to stop ecocide as an aspect of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. And in fact, it was around August, September, I should say, of 2018, that we were contacted by a rebel from XR, as it was forming at that time, who felt that there was a connection directly between XR and the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. And in fact, he made this point of saying that as a white man, he wondered if he could actually be part of our campaign. And that's how he introduced XR to us, because he said, actually, many people in Africa are going to be most affected in the coming, seasons by the climate and ecological emergency. And so we feel that there's a common interest in working together. And then that sparked up some dialogues between other members of the campaign, the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, and some of those who were leading the initiative in terms of the forming of Extinction Rebellion. So in particular, people like Dr. Gail Bradbook and others. And we met with them and had these conversations about the commonality of our interests. So we were invited to participate in the rebellion days, which we did as the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. And then in December of 2018, there was an international letter that was initiated by XR, which was a way of trying to, it was signed by 100 signatories, and it was a way of trying to, again, globalize this issue. And we were invited to help shape that letter, which we did. And one of the important inclusions that we made, which was actually several, was to include wording that mentioned reparatory justice, which is what we as a campaign, the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, were concerned with in terms of our own organising, as well as the fact that people were being encouraged to engage in this rebellion globally from their own perspective, taking into consideration decolonization and also indigenous people's rights. And so we felt those were some important inclusions which would make XR attractive to many people around the world who were already organizing from their own perspectives, their own histories and heritages of rebellion to stop the climate crisis and ecological crisis. So that's how I got involved. And out of that process, we were in dialogue with, as I said, some of the rebels in XR, who we worked together and came up with this notion of the XR-ISN, because we felt, as the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, that there needed to be an organized space and grouping that could lead and on on these issues of promoting internationalist solidarity, but also how to do so in a way that recognized the histories of struggle and rebellion of peoples who came from outside of Europe, so peoples from Africa, peoples from Asia, and Abya Yala or South of the Americas, and other indigenous peoples as well. And we felt that that was a missing link. And we knew that because of how XR formed, it was limited, okay, in terms of the people who actually formed it in the beginning, just the life experiences. And so we felt that this was something that we could add that would help strengthen what we saw as a global rebellion, but had different components. So that was the beginnings, actually, of XR-ISN,
Oh, wow.
as we are called. And we have a specific mandate, as is customary for groups formed in the UK and who are part of the UK XR UK structure. And our mandate is to foster mutually respectful, cooperative and beneficial connections with people from existing grassroots communities of resistance on the front lines of the climate and ecological crisis in both the global south and the global north, who are working on environmental justice, so that one, these perspectives get represented throughout XR UK, and secondly, that there's two-way learning between XR UK and people from these communities of resistance. So we felt that was really important, that there needed to be this platform that could create this dialogue and this mutuality, this learning, this sharing, because we recognized that it wasn't necessarily there. And we felt it was naive to think that the whole movement would just suddenly become super diverse and have an understanding of the issues we were working with and championing, like decolonization, reparative justice, indigenous people's rights, sovereignty. And so that was the space that was created so that we could learn together as we grew this rebellion.
Esther, can I just ask you, because I have to confess, before I worked with Kofi or any people in ISN, I didn't really know what the Maangamizi was. And I think lots of people out there don't know what it was. You know what? I've got a degree in history and I had never heard of it until I went to the Tower Theatre and saw a play. And then I had to come home and look it up. And I was really shocked at what I found. So I think there's lots of people, maybe I'm the only ignorant person in the country, but I think there's lots of people who really don't know what the Maangamizi is. Yeah. And it'd be so great if you could just talk us through it.
Sure. In a nutshell, because there's so much other things to say, the Maangamizi is the experience of what African people have gone through. Some people would use the term slavery or slave trade, but we don't use this terminology because it is demeaning and it reduces the personhood of African people, which was a big part of the enslavement process in terms of dehumanization. But it essentially speaks to the continuum of African chattel slavery, colonialism, and modern day neo-colonialism, and the various legacies or negative or harmful impacts that those experiences, which are a continuity and collective, have left on African heritage communities, both in the diaspora, which we would say perhaps the global north, but also in the global south in terms of where we have originated from. And so it manifests, and one of the easiest manifestations that people hear about is that of racism, anti-Black racism, but its specific form of Afrophobia, which is anti-African prejudice and discrimination. That is a direct legacy, that notion of African people are less human, less intelligent, less worthy of actually even having their rights respected as a human reality. So that is what the Maangamizi is essentially. And a big part of colonization was about redefining injustice and criminality and wrongdoing and sanitizing it, legalizing it as a way of justifying it. And so even to reclaim the language and say this was a Maangamizi, this was what we in African languages, and we've chosen Kiswahili as a Pan-African language, because of course we have many African languages, but in terms of the Pan-African movement, which we're going to go on and talk about, we felt that it's important to choose one that we can popularize as people of African heritage. And so we have seized back the power to define our reality. And we don't define this as a slave trade in terms of its beginning, but as a Holocaust, as one of our community, esteemed community orators and educators, the rapper Akala, has sung about in the song. He actually has a song called Maangamizi, which was actually inspired by the International Social Movement for African Reparations and some of the work that he was doing as part of a course that I was teaching with activists on reparations. And so everybody had to come up with a creative input, and that is how that song, Maangamizi, was born.
Now, if we are concerned with our awakening, it's because we've been asleep. Now, we were put to sleep by historical catastrophes. And you know, when people get into an accident, they need to go to sleep in order to survive the accident. If you're totally conscious when it happens, you won't survive.
How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi. How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi.
Maangamizi meaning African Holocaust, cause we paid a hell of a cost and don't really know what was lost. And the process ain't ever stopped since black civilization dropped through internal greed and external plot. The same ones that taught the ancient Greeks, Greece and Rome helped bring to the knees, then Islam spread across northern Africa. With slavery and massacres, too many hurt, refused to convert, spread south and west, people dispersed. Christianity's not alone in using race and religion for power to expand. Desert caravans took slaves across sand, where they staged the revolt of the Zanj. Enemies always invented mythologies, curse of Ham, so-called prophecy. After the migration, there was some reinstatement of autonomous nations. Then floating on the waves of the seas came a plague, a genocidal disease. With arms and heads, they looked like men. Really, they were just dogs on two legs. When they first came, some of our people said go. Most welcomed them into our homes. We didn't know they had hearts of stone, frozen by Western Europe's cold. Also, there were scumbags among us, willing to work for white conquerors on us. With that collaboration began the largest forced migration in the history of nations.
How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi. How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi.
How many millions dead at the bottom of the ocean, thrown overboard like property stolen and jumped overboard, rather than be sold on a mother with a baby in arms? Hold on, what awaited was not just enslavement, but a genocidal impulse craving. They committed unspeakable abuses to make a nigger from an African human. Took a woman ready to give birth, tied her limbs to 4 posts held firm in the main square, made every slave watch, covered her in raw meat like cutting dogs. If anyone watching, even a relative, made a sound, kill them for the hell of it. This was every day, not the exception. The science of gynecology was perfected on black women, no anesthetic. Said a nigga bitch couldn't feel pain, pathetic. Hang a man from a tree, cut off his penis, force people to eat their own feces, put people in zoos, in a cage, chimpanzee, black human, ape. And it was upon this here atrocity Europe became the dominant economy. Now they play games, pretend it's about names. It's a scheme for unequal trade. Imagine the largest companies today, if all of their employees got no pay. For all of the centuries profit was made, black skin was always branded slave. Even the child of the master's rape could be killed and sold, cause black blood in the veins. But the ancestors fought back, got free. Probably ain't heard of Jean-Jacques Jacques Dessalines. Probably don't know the Haitian Revolution caused the French to sell half of America, nor the role that Africans played in the Civil War for that same America. If you ain't heard of any of the Maroons or Bogle, probably believe what they told you. But if they set Africans free, cause all of a sudden they grew a conscience, tell me this: why were the masters given compensation and those who suffered not given a thing? Why did they then invade Africa, make African slaves in their own homes, with the Belgians killing 10 million souls in the Congo alone? Why then Jim Crow? Why apartheid? Why the Black Wall Street burn that night? Why collaborators will work for such evil, willing to be tools against their own people? Why Africom? Imperialism for the new age with a brown face on it. That's right, imperialism for the new age with a brown face on it.
How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi. How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi.
Some will try their best to justify this torture, asking you who the slaves were brought from. As if we don't know, tell them get the hell out. Every genocide ever has had sellouts, and the largest wars of humans were fought between people of Western Europe. So by your rationale, it's cool to kill Frenchmen, they kill Germans that look like them. Absurd, right? But when your skin's white, different set of rules you can't abide by. Dark suffering's not humanized, no surprise, we still see ourselves through their eyes. Darkies became legally human during the course of our parents' life, and the freedoms we have only occur because the ancestors spilled their blood to the earth. Change that much? You so sure? The world's darker people still the most poor? So it's our task to put an end to this. Even those like me with a heritage mix, if a knife's in your back, 9 inches, and it's only been pulled out 6. When the wound starts healing and we stop bleeding and bleaching, can it begin to fix? When the plague of self-hate's no longer a weight so great, push you to kill one another. When we put a stop to false charity to give with one hand and bomb with the other. When the IMF, World Bank, along with the puppets, no longer strangle our nations. When the invaders don't have military bases in so many places. When the jail cells not packed with black backs and the gats and the crack are no longer factors. When we celebrate true self-determination, not a few token bit part actors. When the truth is told and there is the dignity to remember the dead, as long as they're distorting the past, means they have the intention of doing it again.
How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi. How many lives will be lost to the Maangamizi? It's way bigger than the pain that I place on the CD. If I told you all the truth, would you really believe me? It's the Maangamizi, it's the Maangamizi.
This is Rebel Radio. The time is now.
Instead of using the term Holocaust, which has deemed to be problematic because there is this debate that goes on as to whether there's one Holocaust in terms of Jewish people, or whether the term Holocaust can be used to define other people's experiences of genocide, group oppression and injustice. And so that's why we talk about a Holocaust as a way of just saying that this was actually a living hell. And this living hell continues to this day. It's not a historic experience. So when we talk about exclusions, school exclusions, when we talk about Black deaths in custody, when we talk even about COVID-19 and the disproportionality of people of African heritage and other colonized peoples in terms of those who are dying, that's what we're talking about. The pandemics, not just COVID-19, Ebola, HIV/AIDS, and in the ways in which they have been weaponized. This is what our communities are resisting and also, exploring when we talk about Maangamizi.
Yeah, thank you. I think it really helps to explain it.
Yeah, definitely.
To people who are new to it, so that they start to understand the concepts. And I think the other thing that's very interesting to people, because for lots of people, they'll be like, well, the African nations aren't colonies now, so what's the problem? Okay. And I think understanding how this is an ongoing issue and where it happens is really interesting for people, because I think it's very easy for them to go, well, I didn't make the colonies.
Yeah, I didn't do it. I wasn't here. It wasn't me. And that's, I mean, even that point about African nations not being colonies anymore, I think that's debatable, because actually, if we think about it, the countries that have been formed in Africa maintained the Berlin Consensus, you know, the 1884-1885 conference that carved up Africa along the lines of European nations, and which actually did not respect indigenous national boundaries, ethnicities, and nationalities. So many of the conflicts that we've seen in Africa have been because countries have been formed that actually did not respect indigeneity and the peoples that transcend these borders. So these borders are actually a manifestation of structural violence and Maangamizi, because they're not African. And so what it involves is a re-education process. And actually, this is not just for peoples who are so-called white or from Europe. It also is for the rest of us, even us as African peoples, because we've all been miseducated in a system globally that actually doesn't teach the truth about history and the impacts of history on our present today.
It's so great to hear you say that, Esther, because you know, that's something that we don't hear about. Like, people are like, oh well, people in Africa, they just fight all the time, and I'm like, yeah, because we've split groups up with artificial borders where, you know, families were torn apart. And yeah, it's so, yeah, I think we should have you back on and talk about that for an hour. but let's move on to Peninah, because sure. Peninah, you are heavily involved in the organization of African Liberation Awareness Month. Tell us about how you got involved with XR, and tell us about all the exciting stuff that's coming up.
So just to follow through from what Esther said, in terms of how the involvement came through with XR. In Bristol, we have a link with a city in Mozambique called Beira. If you cast your mind back to 12 months ago, in March 2019, there was a cyclone that destroyed 90% of the city. And that was a very key moment for us to realize, really, in Bristol, what the impact of climate change was doing in those parts of Africa. And I'm involved with XR African Heritage Group from that perspective, but also bringing in the perspectives of two specific local organizations, African Voices Forum, which is a network of African-related associations that come together to really discuss the impact of a wider range of issues around social, economic, and political on a central ground here in Bristol, and thinking about how we in the diaspora react to those and how we support ourselves in the Southwest. And also Bristol Link with Beira, which is the twinning organization that is twinned with between the two cities. We've had this link going for almost 30 years. Actually, this year we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of this link.
Oh, wow.
And from the beginning, you know, when the cyclone hit, being the main organization in the UK that had developed all these links, because the work that the link did was to enable enable an exchange program between schools. So we would also have university students who wanted to go and study Portuguese, who we would organize for them a placement in Beira. We've also had like cultural exchanges where schools here in Bristol would have sessions during African History Month with Mozambicans who came into the city. So there's been a wide range of things we've worked on, even around health issues, around HIV, empowering women across the two cities. Climate change has always been very central to some of this in terms of driving that forward. So I think that the engagement and seeing the links with the wider XR, that at that point presented the perfect opportunity to really raise the profile of what is going on in the global South, very clearly using what had gone on in Beira as a case study to show what the impact of climate change had done. And even now, the groundwork to start to rebuild the city is only just starting. You know, if you can imagine a whole city going down, you wake up in the morning and there's nothing, it's just a sea of water. Roads were destroyed, infrastructure was destroyed. Beira, Mozambique in general, was it had been colonized by the Portuguese, and actually when they left a lot of devastation, because they just wanted to take anything that they thought that they had brought in. So the country itself has gone through a lot of what Esther has called Maangamizi, in trying to rebuild its culture, rebuild its values, realize who they really were. And even politically, they have had continuous struggles trying to re-establish themselves, just because of the infrastructures that were left by the colonizers. So 30 years of that link, and also just really increasing the activism of people within the Bristol area, especially African heritage people, to just really reconnect with how these struggles have contributed to the continued Maangamizi, was really important for us to bring that out. And that leads very nicely to why we are having the African Liberation Awareness Month, because to me, actually engaging with our young people now, most of our young people have been brought up in the global north. They might not necessarily have the awareness, or even know, just because of the way that the education has been structured over years. We talk about decolonizing the wider education agenda. Many of them might not necessarily be aware of things around climate repairs and the planet repairs, and how they're linked to the imperialism, the colonization, the continuing genocide of Black people or African heritage people. So the events begin to raise awareness, not just within our young people, to sort of think about what kind of action, or what is their role in trying to understand and drive forward actions that will support that change to happen. And secondly, having people like Esther, who've had, Esther has got a very wider experience of, even from an academic point of view, in trying to bring them forward, having role models and seeing the people on the ground who are actually leading on these campaigns, is very important for our young people then to sort of have access to those knowledge bases, and also to see clear role models who are driving that. And also re-emphasizing that actually resistance never started just with the work that has been going on within XR, but African communities have been resisting for years and years and years. So it's not something that is new to us. And for them to actually see that, and to have those resources now currently opening to them, redefines how they have actually interacted with the continent, and actually what their role also here is within the diaspora. And our Pan-African ideology also gives us that shared experience, whether we are living here in the diaspora or whether we are living in the continent. So it is almost trying to build that solidarity back from the people who are taken and the people who are living within the continent, to have a shared vision of what our founding Pan-African leaders were thinking about in terms of where Africa would be. So the events are going to be, we've already had the first event, which we had excellent speakers. Esther was one of them. We had Dr. Faluke, who is also an academic and is teaches law at the University of Bristol. And we also had our ex-mayor, Cleo Lake. She was Bristol's mayor last year, and she's now the deputy mayor. And we also had one of our representatives from African Voices Forum. And that has been it was a very successful, launch for the African Liberation Awareness Month.
And so what other things have you got coming up? What could our listeners look out for and come and see?
So to build up on what I would say are our pioneers and our drivers and our role models for the first event, we've got the next session will focus on how young people's roles in trying to also visualize what type of planet repairs are required, and how they can also drive that vision is going to be important. So there's going to be a discussion panel on the 16th of May, which is next Saturday, between 6 and 7:30 p.m. And that is going to be a wider discussion that brings in not just the views of young people here in the diaspora, but also some young people who are active in the continent through XR-ISN and also XR-ISN, which is a local XR group that is already based in Ghana.
That sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
How do people get it? Is it on Facebook? Where do they find it?
It is going to be it will be live on Facebook. It will also be live on YouTube. It will be live on Instagram. So we've got it live across all 3 platforms, and also it will be facilitated through Zoom.
Let us know, because we can retweet it out to our readers. So our listeners, sorry, that's my old life when I worked in magazines. And so that they can find it as well, because it sounds really exciting. Sharing the vision across continents sounds amazing. And then you've got more stuff coming up, haven't you, as well?
Yeah.
Yes, by Carla, yes.
So that is going to be the second event, and the third event is going to be about women's voices. You know, again, women have been very much in the forefront of resistance, and there is incredible women working in different parts of Africa who are doing incredible things around climate change within their smaller communities, which is not always very visible. So we'll have a platform where we will again have an exchange of ideas around the impact of climate change, you know, from even, you know, if you think about it, in terms of migration, you know, how that is resulting in migration in different places. So we bring in some experts who have got specific interest around migration and climate change. And then we will also have speakers who are going to focus on how the experience of the education system in their role as mums who have had young people who they've brought up within those systems, and how those systems have actually been a challenge to them, to their role as mums, and what they have done in terms of that. We are sort of referring to it as women's voices.
It's the 25th of May, yeah?
25th of May.
Yeah, okay.
And that is actual African Liberation Day.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Which is a global day, isn't it? That's around the whole world?
Yes.
And then also you're going to come back, aren't you, on the 29th of March, and we're going to have a roundup show on Rebel Radio of all the activities that have been going on within UK XR for African Liberation Month.
Yeah.
Awareness Month.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a really good program. It sounds really hard to get things together across 2 continents.
Yeah.
I mean, I know how hard it is to get people into a Zoom for a radio, so it sounds like a lot of work, but it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, amazing. I can't wait.
Thank you for coming in and explaining all that to us. Really great to have you on as guests. Thank you both very much for coming, and look forward to having you as guests again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
Aquele charme, aquele som que me engana, me faz esquecer do perigo. Sem mais, de repente, rolando no mar, que era a pondeza, rouba-me o ar, passou demais. O que escondes aí, o que escondes aí?
Rebel Radio is broadcasting live from Soho Radio, London, expanding the cultural conversation around the climate and ecological crisis. Stay tuned for change.
And that was the wonderful band Grandma with Indigo. They are based in Mozambique. So I thought, seeing as Peninah was talking about Bristol being twinned with Beira in Mozambique, I thought I would play them. And I just love their songs. Check them out on grandmaband.com. Right, we